Good morning, everybody. Good morning, and welcome to Continuing Professional Education Services free hot topic. Usually a monthly program, but now it has become weekly. We were here last week and we talked about the political scene and the regulations and the rules and the legislature and the upcoming election. And today we're going to talk about PCBs. Not sure which one's more interesting, but we're going to find out by the end of the day. Uh,
What are the odds?
Yes. This is recorded, and I will ask everybody, this is a meeting format, so you do control yourself muting and unmuting. I will control as best I can to make sure nobody interferes with the presenters this morning. But if you can also just make sure you keep yourself muted, I will do my best to do that also.
None of us can control George, so it's really pointless still.
Yeah, unfortunately, but he's a speaker though, so I'm not going to mute him, unfortunately, today. It is my my pleasure. One, I always want to make sure on the call with us is Julianne Masago, who is our executive director of Continuing Professional Education Services. And I always say we're all here because she makes sure that we get into the right room and that it all works out and our presentations all work out. But with us this morning also are two presenters on this topic. We have Dr. George Berkowitz, who always loves when I say he's the chairman of the board of Continuing Professional Education Services, CPES. Him, Frank Sinatra, and I forgot who was was it Mickey Mantle? No,
Sammy
Whitey Ford.
Whitey Ford is the chairman of the board. Thank you.
Yep.
For all of you baseball fans out there, and what a game last night. And then also with us today is Rodger Ferguson from Integra. Integral. When I say Integra, yeah, look at that.
Yeah, you don't know the meaning of the word Integra.
Integral. I knew it was an I, and I'm not going to go into long presentations about these two individuals' backgrounds, reputations, and resumes because that would take up the entire hour. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Berkowitz. I am going to put into the chat a question, ask everybody if they would like to see this turned into a 3-hour course. So give us your feedback on that. 2, I'm going to provide the slides that Rodger is going to share with everybody as they go through their program. And 3, if you have any questions, comments, and you need something answered, if you put that into the chat, we'll make sure everybody answers it. So with that, I've taken enough time. I'm turning it over to Dr. Berkowitz. It is your show.
Okay, good morning. Can you punch up my slides, Phil?
You have slides too? I thought Rodger had slides.
No, I have slides too.
Oh, you do? Okay. I wasn't prepared for that. I apologize.
Yeah,
I'll pull them.
No problem. I'll kill some time. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. Rodger and I talked about this, and I thought it was important that we had some basic background in PCBs, and a lot of you guys are technical, but a lot of you guys who have joined us today are not necessarily technical. Ray Papperman stands out as a prime example. Hi, Ray. And one of my favorite attorneys, Rick Engel, who I used to work with when I was at DEP. He's probably as smart as anybody that I've ever met. But at any rate, we do these hot topics because we can. And there's a lot of changes going on. Who knows with a new administration, when a new administration comes in, who the next commissioner is going to be, et cetera, and then what their ilk is, so to speak, relative to environmental enforcement. It's interesting that the most devastated, or I should say, the group that took the biggest hit relative to furloughs at the federal level was USEPA. 89% of the EPA staff were hit with a notice. So this is going to have impact on the state of New Jersey. Perhaps the state of New Jersey is going to have to do more than they have in the past, and that remains to be seen how that's going to happen if there's a lack of money. So with all that stuff, there's going to be a lot of changes. There's going to be a lot of policy. Policy is probably more important, as Tony Russo pointed out in our chat with him. Policy is too easy. You can decide that you're going to have a policy today, and you may have to put it on the web, but you don't have to go through the whole rigmarole of getting it approved for, as you would regulations, which take over a year to promulgate, absolutely over a year. So at any rate, with that said, we do these hot topics, and I'm sure we're going to be doing a lot more. I've been given 25 minutes to go through 29 slides. Rodger's got the more important stuff to tell you guys. I just wanted to make sure that everybody started with the same background. And Phil, do you have my slides up yet?
I don't have any slides for you. Did you send them over?
I said Jules has them. Yep, I sent them to you too.
I just talked to Jorge. I'll look and see if I can find them. But why don't we start with Rodger then? Can we start with Rodger instead?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
Well, I'll cover the basics, George. It's
Yeah.
No, don't you cover the basics. I don't trust you. Okay.
Don't always trust the chemist, George. I mean, come on. Okay,
Yeah, right. Okay, you can
pull
do it.
myself together here.
Yeah.
Okay. So over here it says share. And do that. And we'll share. And go to slide view. Come on, there we go. Hey, it's wonderful when it all works. Good morning, everybody. To George's point, I was in a meeting yesterday with EPA Region 3.
Hey, Rodger. For
Yes.
some reason up there, they just popped up. Okay, good. Good to go. Keep going.
Okay. Yeah. Region 3 is working right now. I can't speak for Region 2. But it seems like if it's an NPL case only, i.e. the responsible party is paying, they're able to work. They don't know for how long. So I have not heard from Region 3. I have a risk assessment, or Region 2, excuse me. I have a PCB risk assessment in front of Region 2 right now that, you know, they've been saying, oh, we're just waiting for the lawyers to review it. And I'm still at a loss as to why. But we're here to talk about the original forever chemicals, PCBs. Right. Real briefly, PCBs are a class of 209 different molecules, 2 benzene rings linked together with varying numbers of chlorines. There's a naming convention, right? You have the Arachlors, which is Monsanto's trade name. Monsanto made almost 95% of what was in the United States. And that name is based primarily on the percent chlorine in the mixture. And they were sold as mixtures. They were never sold as pure compounds. It's just, you know. And so Arachlor 1248 meant that was finished product. The 12 was finished product. If it was 11, it was the raw product that was not cleaned up at the manufacturing level. Then it became 12, and 48 was 48% chlorine. And they were all made by basically the same process. You know, forcing the chlorines onto that biphenyl molecule. And, you know, there's a few byproducts here and there, but not a lot to speak of. There is such a thing as the terphenyls, 3 benzene rings. I've actually seen those in the wild, but you'll see a reference here occasionally to Arachlor 5460. That was a terphenyl mixture. They're out there. They're not very common, and EPA's thought is that, well, if you clean up the PCBs, you get those too. Not necessarily true. Okay, enough of the basics. I could go on for an hour about just the chemistry. In February 2024, EPA promulgated an update to TSCA. This is the first update since the mega rule in 1999. And it was originally driven by concern that the analytical requirements were way out of date. But like in any rulemaking process, other things happened. And that's not necessarily for the worst, but this is all stuff we need to know. So very high level. New rules on performance-based cleanup, which we'll talk about. Disposal flexibility. You can now, you know, we'll touch it, it'll come up again, but you can use a Subtitle C landfill, a RCRA landfill, not just a TSCA landfill, doing performance-based cleanups. Broaden the analytical matters, some enhanced flexibility for emergency responses, and the e-manifest system is adopted. There's a link when you get the slide set. This is EPA's fact sheet about the performance-based cleanup changes. This is really good. I'll give them credit for this one. So the other thing they did in the performance-based cleanup enhancements is there's some, they clarified the cleanup standards, and we'll get into those and we'll drill down into that. There is now a 30-day post-cleanup notification required. You got to send EPA the cleanup report. And this is where I'm unclear as how it would relate to an LSRP. I'll let you know, because I've got a couple of these running down the road, is do I need to wait for EPA approval before I write my RL? Because Region 2 is looking at the stuff.
Roger, what's very interesting, you bring up a very good point, and TSCA is a non-delegatable program.
Absolutely.
And EPA has primacy. Doesn't mean DEP can't regulate some cleanups, but DEP at certain levels of PCBs, you got to go through EPA.
Correct. And DEP has no enforcement authority.
Right.
Period. And don't let them tell you otherwise. Okay. But we're seeing things pop up in biannual certifications, PCBs that have been capped in permits that DEP let slide. And frankly, DEP has ignored TSCA when it suited them in the past. And there is nobody at 401 State Street who understands this rule. There is somebody who is self-appointed queen of TSCA.
Uh-oh.
I'll just leave it at that. The cleanup levels. This is now specified better in rule. Bulk PCB remediation waste, soil, anything over 1 milligram per kilogram is TSCA applicable. So, and concrete's a porous material, right? Non-porous surfaces, 10 micrograms per 100 centimeters BL wipe test is regulated. Organic liquids and non-aqueous inorganic liquids, 2 milligrams per kilogram PCBs. And then, they put, numbers into the system, into the rule, non-contact use in a closed system, water discharge to treatment works or navigable waters less than 3 micrograms per liter. The groundwater quality standard in New Jersey is still 0.5, and unrestricted use is 0.5 micrograms per liter. So, okay. As I mentioned before, non-liquid PCB waste can now be disposed of in a RCRA landfill. This will save money. Not everything has to go to Republic in Michigan. Niagara Falls is closed. That old landfill, unfortunately. So trucking costs just kill you. It's still expensive. But you're no longer allowed to use bulk product waste as roadbed material. I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but that's now prohibited by rule. And again, I mentioned that the manifesting system, e-manifest is now usable for PCBs as well. So same system that we use for RCRA. There are flexible cleanup project procedures for natural disaster related releases for floods and hurricanes. This is not something we'll be able to use on a day-to-day basis. I've kind of looked through these, but if you're going to be in that world, certainly look at the new rule. I'm not going to get into a whole lot here. Waste characterization is supposed to be simplified. I think waste characterization is what it is. But they do, EPA will allow composite sampling of the waste to a degree. But at the end of the day, your PCBs are characterized by the in situ concentrations, not when you dig it out and put it in a pile. So you can't dig it all up, it gets mixed and say, oh, we're non-TSCA because we're less than 50 or less than 1 in the disposal pile. It's what were the in the ground concentrations that drive it. Okay. A little bit redundant here. but they really like to say they simplified reporting requirements. Yeah. One of the big changes, and again, this is what drove it, was the change in analytical methods. Previously, EPA approved only manual sock slit extraction method 3540, earlier version, and method 8082. If you weren't using those methods, you were not in compliance with TSCA. There's always been a provision that you can get alternate methods approved, but laboratories weren't doing it. So if you had a TSCA project, doing everything by the book was difficult. Okay, and especially if litigation was involved, somebody might be sitting there on stand other and saying, oh, no, 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 you did automated sock slit extraction. Your data is no good because that's not in the rule. I don't know anybody here who might have ever said anything like that. So this is important when you set your projects up from the get-go. Okay. Make sure you're using, and you talk to your lab and that they're certified for whichever extraction method you want. The labs are all running 8082A. That's the most current method. That's what Office of Quality Assurance requires you be certified for. That's the easy part. Okay. The difficult part to check when you're doing your QAPP is the extraction method. But here you have a lot of flexibility. Long overdue. And to tie into what DEP is doing, we're working on an update of the data of known quality as we speak, which will include updated QA/QC guidelines, recommendations, whatever you want to call it, for method 8082A. Okay, and I made sure DEP has this list of which extraction methods are permittable under TSCA, because that makes a difference. So stay tuned for that. I don't know how long it's going to take us to get through the rest of those guidance documents, but we're almost done with all the QA table stuff. Okay, but talk to your lab as always. Okay. If you're doing white samples, pay particular attention to the rule. There's a couple of things are not allowed for white samples that used to be. I didn't get into it here, figuring we deal mostly with dirt and things. But okay. Enough on that. Performance-based remediation is now restricted in certain circumstances. What does that mean? Well, it means you can't just go do it and report it to EPA later. If you have PCBs in the surface water or groundwater, you can't do a performance-based cleanup. Sediments in marine and freshwater ecosystems, sewage treatment systems, drinking water sources, grazing or agricultural lands, vegetable gardens. No, don't get me started. This is the big one. Sites where the cleanup, is adjacent to or contains or is proposed to be redeveloped to contain residential dwellings, hospitals, schools, nursing homes, playgrounds, parks, daycare centers, endangered species habitats, estuaries, wetlands, national parks, national wildlife refuges, not refugees, commercial fisheries, sport fisheries, or surface waters, or where PCB is in the 100-year floodplain. All of these scenarios would have to submit for a self-implemented remediation subject to EPA pre-approval. You cannot do performance-based. I'm not sure what happens if you send it in after the fact and they figure it out. I think they will have kittens at you. Okay. So this is, a lot of the stuff that we do is redevelopment, taking an industrial site and making it residential, right? if there are TSCA applicable PCBs, and we'll get back into that, then you have to go to the agency.
Hey, Roger,
Yes.
Colin just asked the question I was just thinking, but he says, working with EPA coordinator to confirm their definition of adjacent. And I was going to ask the question, it says, is adjacent to, contains, or is proposed to be redeveloped to contain residents? As you just said, that's almost every site.
Yeah. Yeah, you're working in the ironbound. Guess what?
Mhm.
Yeah. I have not seen a definition to adjacent to. I'm not sure I want to ask the question, to be honest.
Hey, Roger, and this is one other point that I wanted to make. And I'm not, and by the way, take as much time as you want, because
Go
you're
ahead,
doing a
George.
lot of the other stuff. We have a situation where we have a cleanup of PCBs. PCB's the driver, and it's next to, it's a landfill next to a tributary to the Raritan River. So EPA Region 2 said you can't contain it, you have to remove it down anything greater than 1 part per million.
Mm-hmm.
The administrator of EPA, not the regional administrator, went back to EPA Region 2 and said, this is not acceptable, revisit it, and they just ignored him. So my point simply is that the regional administrator in many cases rules the day, not necessarily the administrator.
Yeah. EPA politics.
Yep.
So, but this is, so the whole idea of a performance-based, we'll circle back on the subject if people aren't familiar, is if you remediate a site to less than 1,
Mm-hmm.
that's TSCA applicable, and you take every gram of dirt that you remove out and you take it to a TSCA or now RCRA Subtitle C landfill, you can do that without pre-approval. Okay, so if it's a small job, hey, we've got a hot spot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing one of these right now. Okay, the hot spot's up and out, it's going off to Michigan. Everything else, is being remediated, less than 0.2, it was under 1. So we're taking out everything else because they want to be unrestricted. That's fine. But that portion was, removed as, a TSCA performance-based remedy. So, but this is a catch to the system. Because when you're doing you're scoping your project, pay attention to this part. Okay. EPA says, make sure you have adequate characterization, to meet, so you can demonstrate that you have delineation, basically, delineation to 1. And then you have to do your verification samples in accordance with the rule. Subpart O goes into the, bulk PCB remediation waste and porous surfaces. Subpart P for non-porous surfaces. Liquid remediation waste has its own requirements. Okay. You got to do it by the book, not the way DEP says to do it. Back to the 3-meter grid. If you have delineation in advance in a 3-meter grid, you don't need to do the post-X's. Otherwise, you need to do post-X sampling in that pattern. Yes, I've had EPA approve other, but I'm going to suggest that if you're doing performance-based, this is the only way you'll get sign-off. Okay. And then again, there's 30-day post-cleanup notification requirement. That's quick. Okay, so that's the summary of the rule. That's
Roger, a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What happens if they don't respond within 30 days?
Normally, you're under traditional pre-notification for a SIP, a self-implemented plan. If they don't respond in 30 days, you have approval. Region 2, however, just put us through the ringer or they refused to even acknowledge that they had it for more than 30 days. And then they decided they needed to comment.
And if you think that was hard, if you take a look at the percentages of the departments who've been noticed furloughs, EPA heads the list. 89% of their staff have received notice of furloughs. So good luck.
I don't know what's happening in the RCRA group, which is where this lives in Region 2. Because that's, TSCA got moved into the RCRA cleanup program a few years back.
A question just came in. I'm assuming you're going to cover it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. This post-closure notification after performance-based is a notification, quote unquote. While I understand a report is needed, EPA may or may not review the notification, and I doubt they will issue an approval, but may ask for more work. As LSRP, since EPA will likely not issue an approval, perhaps a 30-day waiting period after notification before issuance of REO. I think should be a continuation there. But I guess the question is, and I'm assuming you're going to cover that right now as you talk about EPA, DEP, where does the LSRP decision process come into this?
I think I'll go off the cuff here because I haven't, since the change, I haven't pushed anything through yet. I've got stuff in the works. I think I can issue the REO for at least 30 days after EPA has been notified and affirms that they've received the notification. Because that's been a problem under the self-implemented plan. EPA has not even acknowledged that they received it, even though it was, the SharePoint was sent to the appropriate location. And we had that well documented. And then we, got into a back and forth with them over really minuscule stuff. So I don't have a full answer yet. Okay. But if anybody has experience, I'm all ears.
I'll put Jeff's question or comment. He says, I have an ISRA site with PCBs where I got DEP and DOJ to approve a special condition for my REO after RAP application approvals. This was back in 2015, 2016. It indicated the case was closed respect to DEP since the area where the site is located became a circular case during this process. EPA could require additional remediation in the future. And I want to add on to that because it's funny because I was thinking, that 3-year look back on REOs, what happens if EPA comes back 6 years later?
That's problematic. So where I'm seeing issues in New Jersey, and George and I have talked about this because it used to be his problem, is cases that have been ostensibly closed and capped that left behind more than 1 part per million PCBs. As we're going to talk about, you can't do that, without EPA approval, but deed notices and RAPs got approved that way. And now at the biannual certification, some people at DEP are picking up on it. And I'm not saying it's everyone, but it's being called out at the DEP level. So in this particular case, PCBs were capped. They were attributed to historic fill without any direct evidence, one way or the other, and we'll touch on that. And DEP came back and told the developer that, well, we can't, this is no longer protective, blah, blah, blah. You know how they get. Little Johnny might eat the dirt. And there's now 13 to 15 feet of structural clean fill on top of the PCBs. So that started a whole TSCA investigation. And I wrote a risk assessment a year ago that is still not approved by the region. There are no technical questions, only, oh, the lawyers have to understand this so they can sign off. You know, we've written the approval, but I swear I can't, I just makes my head explode.
And Roger, just I think one of the bugaboos is what happens when you get an RAO or you get a closure letter from DEP, you're done, and the standard changes by an order of magnitude. And I
An order of magnitude?
Yeah. So
there's no provision in EPA's rules about a standard change.
No,
George.
I understand that. I absolutely understand
There's
that.
no reopener there.
You have potential reopeners.
The 1 part per million has been on the table forever.
Yeah. But my point simply is that DEP cannot keep going back and forth every time there's a standard change. And most people in power at DEP recognize that, in my opinion. And they're not going to ask you for reopener, irrespective of a biennial certification, if nothing else has changed. That was the position. I don't know if it's going to be the position in the future.
You would have to demonstrate that your remedy is still protective in that.
Exactly.
And certainly if there was a proper cap, and we'll get into that, you know, you can still stand behind that. And again, it's, you know, little Johnny's not going to eat the dirt. That's 15 feet down. So, okay.
Roger, I just want to point out, you have an influx of new people at DEP. The institutional memory is pretty much gone from DEP. And if in fact you have an overzealous project person who may ask you, hey, you know, you cleaned that up to, you left 5 parts per million of PCBs underneath a cap, dig it up and let's take a look at it. Good luck.
Yeah. Yeah. So in July of this year, DEP dropped revised guidance. This guidance was not prepared with any benefit of stakeholder input whatsoever, contrary to the Site Remediation Reform Act. Okay. What's in here, you know, you will hear people refer to this as if it is rule. Okay. I know that when Kevin Schick wrote the original guidance, it ran through EPA Region 2. Nobody has said that this has been done this time. It may have been. Okay. And if you've ever dealt with the regional coordinator, Andy Park, good luck. He's difficult. I'll just say that. So, so let's go through some of the things that are in the guidance. The link will be in the package that Phil gives you. It's at the bottom of the page here. DEP goes out of their way to say they allow compliance averaging of PCBs greater than 1 milligram per kilogram. EPA will tell you to stick it. Flat out. There is no such thing in TSCA.
Au contraire, EPA has cleaned up the Housatonic River using compliance averaging. So how do you justify that?
George, there are exceptions to every rule. Okay. Site-specific circumstances that you may be able to get the agency to approve. The rule does not even mention statistical data handling.
They would not let us use compliance averaging.
I see the comments coming back. Okay. Now, the only place you would do that kind of work is if you do a risk assessment. And then you would be using the 95th percent upper confidence level of the mean. There's very little, you know, in the rule written about how to do it. Okay. You're going back to the CERCLA risk assessment program. Fine. You know, that's the only place where legitimately you can say, I'm going to walk in and I'm going to, you know, do it this way. Otherwise, EPA requires strict point compliance on their 3-meter grid. I've had more than 3-meter grids approved historically. That was back in the days of Jim Hacklar. working for a certain redeveloper who might have given a senator a gold bar and is now serving time. We've all had some wonderful clients. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy, but I digress. But that's, you know that that's out there. So, if you remove everything to one, and then you do compliance averaging on everything else, that's fine. That's a perfect strategy. Say, hey, we removed the hot spot to one, compliance average everything else, be it the 75% 10x rule, or just the mean, or however you choose to do it. That's fine. That'll fly with EPA because they don't care what happens under one. But if it's over one, they're not going for it right now. Okay. PCBs and alternative fill. GEP makes a statement that fill brought to a site from an offset location must be PCBs less than or equal to 1. Obviously, like on like, and the 75th percentile rule applies. Okay, but then they say, use of PCBs greater than 1 is prohibited as alternative fill. That's EPA speaking, because that's a regulated material. EPA has problems with PCBs being taken off-site and going to certain mining site reclamations where the PCBs are greater than 1. So be careful where you send your stuff. If you're, DEP points out that paint, caulks, mastics should all be sampled, and if they're over 50, then those are considered bulk product waste and have to be handled separately. So if you're doing building demolition, consider that. I mean, I worked on the old Ford, some of the shakeout of the Ford Edison debacle at the same time the Martin Luther King School was coming down. Our Clerk 1254 in the caulk is a real thing. And if it's not characterized and dealt with separately during demolition, you're going to have problems. And the same with paints. And it was the good paints that had PCBs in them. You paid extra for that stuff. So they're very common. So, historic fill. Now I'm going to go on a rant, people. All due respect, Rick. DEP got this wrong. DEP directly states that the federal PCB regulations do not define historic fill, and so for the purpose of TSCA, it must be treated as any other PCB contaminated material present on the site. PCBs can be exempt. If historic fill was in place prior to April 18th, 1978, and it's less than 50, it's not regulated, regardless of the source concentration, which, if we're dealing with something that's pre-78, knowing what the source was, I challenge you to know what the source was, but you got to run it down. Or if you know what the source was and it was greater than 500 and deposited before April 18th, 1978, or less than 50, begin on July 2, 1979, those were critical dates in the implementation of the original regulation, it's not a TSCA waste. So what do? You're dealing with historic fill. You're getting PCB hits. They're all over the place. There's no demonstrable pattern of a discharge. Typical heterogeneous crud in Newark. All due offense to anybody who lives in Newark. If you can show that in your due diligence that that historic fill was in place prior to April 18th, 1978, and it's all less than 50, you're done. You have no obligation to report that to EPA, but you need to have that in your pocket if it's ever challenged. And I have, communication from EPA, actually Jim Hackler went on that subject. But having explicit documentation that you say you've looked at that said this is when that got there is critical to saying that's exempt. Now, if you're in a situation where you say this area is exempt and this area isn't, and EPA is looking at it, then you better be doubly sure of your lines of evidence. Okay, so like I said, DEP got this one wrong. They've overstepped here. Okay, I thought I should talk a little bit about self-implemented cleanups. This is in DEP's guidance. They lay out the process. A self-implemented cleanup, you have to notify EPA 30 days in advance. Upload the report to the regional administrator or via SharePoint or OneDrive document. Once you've done your delineation to 1, and of course you delineate to the 0.2, what have you. Your remediation has to, establish that you have a high occupancy area defined as less than 6.7 hours per week. Less than 1 would be unrestricted use. Between 1 and 10 requires a cap and a deed notice. Okay. Of course, DEP's non-residential standard is now 1.1. EPA does not use 2 significant digits. Thank you very much. EPA will, if it's a deed notice and a cap, EPA will accept the New Jersey DEP deed notice. No issue with that. Okay. But it has to clearly show the high occupancy area. 1. A low occupancy area is less than 6.7 hours per week exposure. Okay. And that they mean, any occupiable building. They don't, if it's a guard shack, a lean-to that might be occupied, that would all be prohibited as a low occupancy area. Okay. So under low occupancy areas, less than 25, is unrestricted, you just need a deed notice. 25 to 50, a minimum of fence and signage and a deed notice. 50 to 100 requires a cap and a deed notice. Obviously, all of these require an engineering control in New Jersey. Okay, but a fence and signage is an engineering control, right? Of course, that might render the property unusable, which triggers a whole bunch of other issues in Trenton. You got to think your way through that. DEP says the SIP should be submitted to DEP before initiating the soil remediation. Wrong. You need to submit a remedial action work plan. Can they be combined? Absolutely. But there's no requirement that you send a SIP to DEP. So there may be, for strategic reasons, we sent the SIP to EPA, we did our back and forth, and then the final version gets attached and sent to EPA as a remedial action work plan because they have different component requirements. Or you can do them at the same time, but understand you may be resubmitting your raw to DEP after you get EPA comment and approval. That said, if you send a SIP to, and it's only a SIP to DEP, and they comment on it, you can act accordingly. They don't have any authority. Risk-based. Go ahead.
Rodger, just a quick comment, a question. Is that specifically a low permeability TSCA cap for PCBs greater than 1?
Yes. Yeah, in fact, my next slide, how's that?
There you go. Okay. And the other question that came in is someone asked, exterior areas are exempt from occupancy levels?
Yes. Yeah, if it's the paving of the, the driveway, that's a low, that's a low occupancy area. Piece of cake. So it takes, sometimes you need to rejigger the site development plan to make this work. So EPA very explicitly defines the cap, and I figured it was appropriate to dig in a little for you. It's a minimum of 6 inches of asphalt or concrete, or 10 inches of compacted soil meeting the following geotech requirements: 4 feet of compacted soil liner thickness, permeability less than 10 to the -7th. They're talking about a clay. Okay, it's not 10 inches or 4 feet of soil. It's clay to be a TSCA compliant cap. Makes no sense in reality, but that's still in the rule. That didn't get changed. Okay. So, if you have a landscape area that's part of the engineering control, you need to look at this part. I'm not saying I've had other things approved over the years, but maybe that area says, okay, the engineering control is only the fence and the deed notice, not the soil is not a cap. So if it's a stormwater basin or something like that, you might need to fence it because of the PCBs that are under it. Okay. The other option, of course, is risk-based, which, you still have the same 30-day notice requirement and fully expect it'll take at least a year for the region to approve it. But if you're going to propose leaving more than 10 under a cap in a high occupancy area or greater than 100 in a low occupancy area, risk-based corrective action is the way to go. Okay. Takes a long time to get approved. It's amazing the one I'm working on. There have been no technical comments to the risk assessment. I'm still astounded that it's all, oh, we just want the lawyers to understand it. Who's running the show in Region 2 is my question. There is EPA's FAST guidance, which I would certainly commend everybody to look at, has checklists galore. EPA also has like a regional assessment guidance that they specifically asked us to use, so we used it. Then they came back and said, well, the cross references, are too hard for people to follow. We want you to reorganize the report, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, right.
Rodger, if I could just interject, we heard the regional administrator hold forth and talk about his policy and his philosophy of how to run Region 2. And I have to tell you, it was refreshing. He said we have to reintroduce common sense to some of the regulatory process. So I don't know how that's going to manifest or if it's going to manifest, but it was an interesting comment and everybody took note.
In practice, it's not filtering down the staff level yet, George.
Well, that takes time.
Okay, but there is what's Benny's last name? Benny Coretta. And I'm not sure what Benny's position is, but Andy Park reports to him in the record branch. Benny is the breath of fresh air. And we've been on multiple calls where staff members are, making up stuff. And Benny's like, no, we need to get this done. But it's still not done. So and again, I don't know that they're physically there in the building. I'm almost afraid to email and ask the question. So, so risk-based is a viable option. There was at one point a 500 milligram per kilogram moratorium on risk-based approvals. That was based on work that was done at Jersey Gardens. George, you worked on that. It's partly your fault. I know I worked on a follow-up to that and got, but I've been told EPA has moved off of that. I have not seen that. You'll get everybody to agree that the cap requirements are adequately protective. And you do the risk-based approach that we've used is saying, hey, the cap is built. What happens when the cap fails is how we conduct the risk assessment. What is the relative exposure to a construction worker coming in, going through the cap and putting in a pipeline, for example? Or you can come up with any number of scenarios along those lines. And the numbers work out really well if you do it that way. Obvious, but a EPA is like, oh my God, somebody may build a house on it and plant a garden and grow tomatoes and blah, 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 blah. That doesn't work so well. So, okay. Wrap up a little bit here. I don't know where we are on time. Oh, not bad. We got time to talk to people. Cool. The numbers, keep track of the numbers here, right? Under DEP, less than 0.25 is unrestricted use. Residential, over 2.25, you'll need a, you don't need a cap if it's over 0.25, but if it's over 1.1, you need a cap. Okay. And of course, a D notice. TSCA regulates at 1. Okay. So you're doing performance-based, you got to blend these. The migration to groundwater number is 1.6. The leachate standard is 4.0 as a default. Okay. And yes, there are sites where you see PCBs in the groundwater. It does happen. Sometimes they're just, it says that the sediment, but if there was a solvent system, very, very common, I shouldn't say it's very common, but it's common to run into them at that point. So keep track of those. Okay. And just know that we're mixing and matching here. Okay. Under EPA, 1 to 10, high occupancy. Cap, you'll need a cap and a deed notice. 25, low occupancy without engineering controls for EPA, but you'll need them for DEP. 25 to 50, again, fence, signage, deed notice. Your fence can be your engineering control in New Jersey, but greater than 50, EPA will require the cap. Okay. So that 100 is the key for if you're doing a self-implemented approval. And that's really all I had. We can talk more about PCBs.
Look, I had a slide deck, but based on the questions that I'm hearing, or Phil's here talking about, I think this is a reasonably sophisticated audience. Most of my stuff was really going to bring people to a common point where we could just take off. You've done a great job doing this, and I'm glad that we had the opportunity to put you first, because I don't think, quite frankly, that it's really going to be time well spent if we were to go over everything that I have. I will just tell you quickly that there's 3 different ways of naming PCBs, and people think that we defer to the arrow clause, and we do defer to the arrow clause, but that's only one subset of PCB compounds. So the point simply is that there are different ways. The IUPAC method really gives you the most information. And by what does IUPAC stand for? International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry. Have a list of, oh, by the way, I do want to do this. This is the most meaningful book. If you want to have a quick synopsis of any type of chemical.
Don't move it, George. Yeah.
Can you?
Morrison? Yeah, absolutely.
This is Morrison and Murphy. It's the Environmental Forensics Contaminant Specific Guide. It's a must book. It's
a good start when you're going into the stuff.
You've got to have it. It's so the wide spectrum of contaminants that we deal with, and that's probably the most important thing I'll tell you. This is out on this particular. So let me just hold this up. I tried to do it. My computer screwed me up on this. This is the all 209 structures of the PCB.
The congeners. Mm-hmm.
It's right in Marson and Murphy. It's, by the way, again, it's a great book.
But understand, George, that, you know, if you're running method 1663 and counting each congener,
Yeah,
that there are compliance issues, because compliance is based on total PCBs.
right.
Total PCBs as characterized by method 8082, counting each hour chlor mixture. So that is apples and kumquats.
Here you are.
Compliance purposes. But
Here you are.
yep.
PCBs. These are just hour chlors.
Right. Those are the different mixtures.
Right.
Oh, God, you're doing this old school, George.
What's that?
You're doing this old school.
Yeah, well, I mean, hello. You have problems with that? So no, I mean, my printer's just shot. But at any rate, Roger, we have a couple more minutes. I think.
Yeah, there's some more questions in here. So
yeah, well, I would ask you to talk about the Trenton Schools project. You were working on that, right?
Yep.
Tell us what happened there.
We were hired by New Jersey schools back in the day. And when they started construction on the Martin Luther King School, which was in between the new Martin Luther King, so in between the old junior school and the Thomas Jefferson Elementary School, on ground that the city school district already owned. There was a geotechnical problem with the historic fill material. That part of Trenton was all backfilled with coal ash. They had mined out the white clay for the ceramics industry, and there were feet of historic fill. So New Jersey schools, in the rush to build things, short-circuited. And there was a line in the geotechnical report that said, hey, you know, either you change the foundation system of the school, or you exchange the materials, you know, dig out the historic fill and replace it with something else. And one of the something else's was recycled concrete aggregate. So the contractor proceeded to excavate the historic fill, imported recycled concrete aggregate, and for many months, New Jersey schools and their construction manager, which was Hill Associates, were asking for the, is it clean fill material? And we went out and looked at it, sampled it, and lo and behold, it wasn't. And there were PCB hits, there was a lead hit, you know, PAHs, all the usual stuff. The contractor stated that they took the material to Pennsylvania and blended it with concrete and brought it back. There was a RCRA issue. You know, this stuff failed to T-clip. By the mixture rule, that meant the whole pile was a RCRA issue. At the end of the day, and the first thing we wrote was, you know, if you averaged out the T-clip data, it was not an issue, therefore it was not a RCRA issue. DEP signed off on that. But the school district would not sign a deed notice because it went political, and it was ugly. And we were on the front page of the Trenton Times every day, which is why I read 3 newspapers online every morning to this day.
Make sure your name's not there.
Yeah, pretty much. Not doing a perp walk. We came back and we excavated out, you know, the building was partially constructed. The building had to be demolished. We came back and excavated the building footprint so it could be reconstructed in a clean envelope. And then we came back and had to excavate the outside of, you know, so we excavated the donut hole first, But again, because the school district would not sign off on the deed notice, we came back and we excavated the rest of the property.
Yeah.
So that $23 million school became a $75 million school.
Bill,
Because
can you
Jersey
upload my
Schools
slide?
was not paying attention.
Can you upload my slide deck? I'm not going to go through it. I just want to show people what I put in. Can you
Yeah,
upload
go
that?
ahead.
George, I have no slide deck for you.
I just sent it to you again.
Oh, I didn't look at my emails. I'm
Quite
working.
nicely, girls.
Jewel, never mind. Forget about it.
Well, no, wait 1 second. I'm.
I sent it to you right at the beginning.
George, I have no emails from you.
That's impossible.
It might still be in the bunnies and the hamsters are running around.
Yeah. Well, at any rate, it doesn't matter.
We'll get it out to the participants.
Yeah,
I apologize.
we'll
for
load
that.
it up. It's basically a
Yeah.
fundamental of a lot of naming PCBs, the 3 methods of naming the PCBs, some of the basic inherent intrinsic intrinsic properties of the compounds.
Mhm.
And easy, buddy. he's upset with you, Phil. So at any
Okay.
rate, yeah, just load it up and people can take a look at it. It's pretty self-explanatory.
Apologize for that. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get it up.
No
Yeah.
problem. No
So we
problem.
are at 9:01. I
Right.
want to, if there's any other questions to bring up for Rodger and George, I think a great presentation, both of you. Rodger, great slides.
Are you saying
Um,
silence from me connotes a good presentation? Is that what you're saying?
I did not say that. I didn't say that. But no, I think handled points and the questions that came in, and it's interesting, always interesting to me to see the interaction between people who are attending and the problems that they have dealt with over the years and their input. And I think for many people who participated in the chat, your input was great. It does look like a consensus, by the way, guys. A 3-hour class would be welcomed, and we should encourage that and put that together.
Yeah.
Because aside from the fact people are always looking for credits, this is what's the phrase? An anomaly wrapped in an enigma, whatever that is, because of the interaction between DEP, EPA, and the lack of interaction between EPA, DEP.
Yeah.
As LSRPs, where the heck do we stand? And
It's interesting, Phil. I mean, we jump from pollutant du jour to pollutant du jour, and PFAS are all the talk of the town. PFAS are easy to deal with relative to PCBs in the environment. So, don't
In some ways, yes. In other ways, no. But yeah.
Well, come on, Rodger. You don't have to say
There's plenty of PCB work out there, and the intersection between the two regulatory authorities makes it very difficult.
Yeah, and people say that PCBs are all over in every corner of the world, which means that even though they have a low volatility, extremely low volatility, how did they get into the Antarctic? How did they get into the Arctic? And it remains to be seen, well, how those sources how they happen. But at any rate, they're all over the place.
So Rodger, is your follow-up to that comment you just made that we should all be very thankful that EPA did not handle PFAS in the way that PCBs were handled? Is that what you're saying?
Hey, there was talk about adding them under TSCA, and it didn't happen. So be thankful for that. That's I mean, as a rule, people don't want to reopen TSCA at the legislative level.
Right. But the other point simply is to take a look at what EPA is regulating, the PFAS, PFOS, so forth and so on, and realize that is significantly lower than DEP standards, significantly lower, down to 4 parts per trillion versus 13 and 12 parts per trillion. So take a look at that.
Implementation that's being delayed, and we haven't heard the last on that subject, so keep your ears to the ground.
And we will say that this subject will be revisited in a 3-hour class in a webinar near you soon. So Rodger, George, thank you very much for your input and your knowledge today and adding all that. And I'll apologize everybody if George's slides didn't make it out to you. I will, as soon as they make its way through the internet and makes it to my computer, I'll make sure everybody gets it. So
interesting.
With that, everyone stay well, be good, go Rutgers football. All we can ask for is a score on Saturday night.
Yeah.